Welcome back to Killer Stories. I'm your host, Bobby Holmes. Recently, I've been working with other podcasters on upcoming collaborations. Next week, I'll have Killer British Murder Stories Volume 2 with Stuart Blues from British Murders. I'm also recording with Lorraine from Once Upon a Nightmare to discuss a horror film. The thing is, I podcast week to week. I'll admit I'm not the most organized. Most times, I don't even know what case I'm covering until 4 days before the episode airs. So instead of taking a week off, I'm going to cover the case I talked about in my last collab with Stu. On his podcast, I discussed Texas serial killer Charles Albright, also known as the Eyeball Killer. Some of you may have already tuned in to British Murders and heard it back in February, but it's a crazy case and it's worth sharing with all of my listeners. Charles Albright was born August 10, 1933. His mother was just 16 years old. Her father disapproved and forced her to put the baby up for adoption. Charles was being cared for in an orphanage when Dell and Fred Albright adopted him at 3 weeks old. Fred was a local grocer in Dallas, Texas, while Dell was a school teacher. She took the role of a new mom very seriously, especially his education. She wanted the best for Charles. She kept a goat in the backyard so he would have fresh goat's milk every day. She stressed the importance of a well-balanced meal. She'd make him sit at the dinner table until he ate every single bite of food. It didn't matter if he was already full. He excelled in piano, starting lessons at a very young age. Dell helped him study, and eventually he skipped 2 grades in school. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting the best for your child. But Dell is what I would call a tiger mom, wanting the best of the best and pushing them hard to get there using extremely strict parenting methods. If you aren't familiar with that term, a tiger mom's goal for their children is to earn straight A+. Not A's, A+. A B is unacceptable. The children excel in extracurricular activities like musical instruments and essentially getting into Ivy League schools to become a doctor or a lawyer. However, I think Dell took things a step further. Her punishments crossed the line of strict to abusive. Charles's punishments involved being locked inside of a dark room for a long period of time. If it was time to sleep but Charles wasn't tired, Dell would strap him down to the bed. Dell's sister had what I find to be a very strange relationship with Charles. When she came around, she would give him dolls to play with and make Charles wear girls' dresses. Now, if that's what your son is into, I'm all about letting them embrace that. But forcing dresses on a boy is weird. And honestly, this is unrelated to the case, but could have psychologically messed him up, so I thought it was worth mentioning. As a teen, Charles received a gift, his very own gun. He used it to shoot small animals like squirrels and rabbits. At this point in his life, his dream was to become a taxidermist. Taxidermy is very common where I grew up. But just in case you're more of a city person, it's the art of preserving an animal's body by stuffing or mounting for display. His mother would help him turn the animals he shot into trophies for his wall. Legitimate taxidermists use realistic-looking glass eyes, but Dell was cheap and wouldn't allow Charles to buy those. She had perfectly good buttons in her sewing kit. So all of his trophies had buttons for eyes, which I imagine looked like freaky, realistic stuffed animals. I mean, technically they are stuffed animals, but you know what I mean. He would often ride the bus to the local taxidermy shop to explore. They had boxes full of glass eyes, and Charles would admire them, touch them, all while knowing he wasn't allowed to use them on his animals. Charles was an unruly teenager. He was first arrested at the age of 13 for aggravated assault. When he was 17, he stole $380, a rifle, and a couple of handguns. This crime landed him in prison for 6 months. But his jail time did not reform him. As soon as he was released, he was back to his petty theft. He attended Arkansas State Teachers College. Even though he was a troubled teen, he excelled at school. Thanks, Dell. And was very sociable. He was editor of the yearbook, president of French Club, and on the student council. He was fluent in English, Spanish, and French. Here's where things get really weird. Charles had a stack of pictures of him and his friends. One day, his roommate returned to find a picture of his girlfriend on the wall. But Charles cut out the eyes from a different photo, one of the roommate's ex-girlfriend, and glued them onto the new girlfriend's face. He did this with more than one photo, and apparently no one found it strange. All his friends in his dorm just thought it was a prank. Well, I find it disturbing. When he was 20, he met 19-year-old Betty Nestor while at college. For whatever reason, she had a set of keys to the entire college, and Charles talked her into giving them to him. He broke into an office and was caught stealing. Charles was expelled from school, but Betty finished her degree and became a teacher. The two were married in late 1954, soon after they had a daughter together. He continued to steal things and rarely met with consequences. In 1968, Charles got a job as a school teacher by forging documentation of graduation from Arkansas State Teachers College. Not just a teacher, but head of the biology department. He was popular with the students and even coached the football team. When he was caught in his lie, he only had to serve probation, no jail time. He and Betty separated in 1975. The next lucky lady in Charles's life was named Mary White. Their relationship lasted about 3 years. After that, he had a new live-in girlfriend named Dixie Austin. Through these relationships, he continued his life of crime, forgery, theft, and even child molestation. Charles was visiting some friends in 1981 and molested their 14-year-old daughter. Even after pleading guilty, Charles only got probation for the incident. How much shit can this guy get away with? Later, he said he didn't do anything and only pled guilty to avoid, quote, a hassle. I don't know about you, but I don't think molesting a teenager is something that you just go along with. That goes on your record, and everyone in the neighborhood knows you're a sex offender. Well, maybe it's not as easy to access that list in the 80s as it is today, but still. After this, he tried to become a Boy Scout leader and was denied. Thank God. Since Charles was fired from his teaching job, Dixie was the sole breadwinner. She was paying all the bills while Charles made next to nothing as a paper delivery man. On his paper route, Charles would make a pit stop for some early morning nookie with sex workers. Safe to say he was a regular, and most of the prostitutes in the area were familiar with him. Sex worker Mary Pratt is the first victim in this case. She was found dead the morning of December 13th, 1990. Mostly nude, sprawled out on the ground, the cause of death was a gunshot to the back of her head. Apparently, prostitutes were found dead often enough that this didn't seem that unusual, other than the fact that she was nowhere near her normal working corner. She worked the red light district on Jefferson Boulevard in downtown Dallas. But Mary's body was found way outside of town on a residential street, in someone's front lawn. It wasn't noticed at the crime scene, but during the autopsy, they discovered that her eyes were cleanly removed from the sockets. No major damage to surrounding tissues and no blood. Police quickly realized this is not the typical murdered sex worker they're used to dealing with. Like I mentioned, she was surrounded by family homes. The location seemed off. The fact that the eyes were removed had investigators very concerned that there was something way more sinister going on. According to Veronica Rodriguez, her coworker, we'll call it, the two were on a double date the previous night. Not a normal double date with 2 guys and 2 girls. This was one man paying for 2 girls. She said the man they were with attacked them. Veronica was able to escape, running through a field and hid in a drain pipe. She hid there all night until she felt safe enough to run for it and ended up at the home of Aston Schindler. Police only know this story because a few days later they find Veronica and Aston having sex in a car. She was a known sex worker in the area, so police go to arrest them both. but she starts screaming not to arrest him, that he saved her. She was high on drugs, and the police didn't take her claims seriously, even though she did seem like she had been roughed up. February 10th, 1991, 2 months after the death of Mary Pratt, another victim was found. Susan Peterson was lying dead on the exact same street as Mary, arms and legs spread out and next to no clothing. She had been shot 3 times, her left breast, the top of her head, and the back of her head. Her eyes had also been cleanly removed with surgical precision. These murders made front-page news, and the murderer on the loose was dubbed the Eyeball Killer. Exactly 1 month later, March 10th, 1991, a third victim was discovered. Shirley Williams was naked, lying on the curb of an elementary school. She too had been shot through the top of her head, but also in her face, leaving her unrecognizable. And you guessed it, missing her eyeballs. Like the other victims, Shirley was a sex worker. But there were some differences in this murder from the previous 2. One being that she was black and the previous 2 victims were white. That might not seem that unusual, but killers tend to stick to similarities in their victims. Another difference was the removal of her eyes. It was very messy in comparison to Mary and Susan's. It seemed like the killer was in a hurry, not very precise with his or her dissection. In fact, there was a piece of an X-Acto knife left in one of Shirley's eye sockets. Sex workers threw out Charles's name when questioned because he was a creepy regular and tended to be a little rough with the girls. Investigators pieced together that Charles Albright owned 3 properties, all of which were near where the victims' bodies were found. Charles was taken in for questioning and his house was searched. Police found tons of X-Acto knives, but none that could be linked directly to the victims. He also had a little hidey hole in the mantle of his fireplace that housed his firearms. But again, nothing matched the gun that was used to shoot Mary, Susan, or Shirley. They found a red condom in his bedroom, which isn't that out of the ordinary, except that a red condom was also found near Shirley's body. Funny thing is that Charles's wife Dixie had already been through menopause. Condoms aren't necessary. At the moment, investigators knew that they didn't have enough evidence to convict Charles. But then, hairs that were found on or near the victims' bodies were also found at Charles's home. One hair found was identified as Charles's pubic hair. Others were that of a squirrel from one of his taxidermy projects. Veronica Rodriguez positively identified Charles Albright as the man who assaulted her the night of Mary Pratt's murder. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Charles Albright to this day denies involvement in the murders of Mary, Susan, and Shirley. He actually claims he has never been with a prostitute and all those women are lying. I guess it's his word against theirs. But why would they conspire together to lie about him being a regular? It seems way more likely that Charles is the liar. When I covered this case on British Murders, Stu was reluctant to believe that Charles Albright was responsible for the murder of Shirley Williams. Because the first 2 had their eyes removed with surgical precision, but then Shirley's was not, and the first 2 were found on the same street, but Shirley's body was found in a different area. And finally, that she was shot in the face. It didn't match the other 2. But the pubic hair and the squirrel hair, it was found on Shirley's body, as well as the red condom near the scene. Quite a coinky-dink right there. Therefore, I do believe that Charles is responsible for all 3 murders. He must have just been rushed when removing Shirley's eyeballs. You would think with his fascination of eyes that he would have kept the eyeballs as trophies, but none of the women's eyes were ever found. While imprisoned, Charles was interviewed by Skip Hollinsworth for an article in Texas Monthly. They were discussing his collection of books. Charles had Gray's Anatomy as well as many true crime books about serial killers. Charles says he has a full library of books in every subject, so it wasn't strange that he had those books in particular. When discussing his conviction, Charles said, quote, "I would never have dumped them on the street where they would easily be found. Look, if I made up my mind I was going to be one, I wouldn't have been caught on the third killing. If I had decided to be a serial killer, I sure would have been a good one. You can ask anybody about anything I've ever done. I tried to be the best at what I did," unquote. Again, thanks, Del. His defense team has tried to appeal his conviction due to a lack of evidence, but they were denied. Charles is currently serving his life sentence at the Texas Department of Corrections. If you enjoyed today's story, be sure to subscribe to Killer Stories so you never miss a new episode. If you're one of many who listen on my Buzzsprout website, I want you to take note of my link tree. It's linktr.ee/killerstories. The reason being, I might be switching podcast hosting sites in the future, meaning the Buzzsprout site will no longer work. But if you have my link tree, you'll have any up-to-date information as far as episodes and where to listen. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Killer Stories Podcast. My Twitter handle is at Killer Stories PC. Keep sending me your story suggestions to KillerStoriesPodcast@gmail.com. I actually had a really cool idea. If you guys want to send me an audio recording with your name and the case you suggest, I'll just insert that into the beginning of my episode. So if you feel so inclined, send me a voice recording. I love hearing from you guys, and it's amazing that I have listeners from around the world. Until next time, this has been a Killer Story.